Okay, I'd like to call tonight's regular council meeting to order. Recommendation that the agenda for the regular council meeting of December 12th, 2016 be adopted as presented. Moved by Councillor Randhawa, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Item 3A, recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting of November 28th, 2016 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Item 3B, recommendation that the minutes of the regular council meeting of November 28, 2016 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item 3C, recommendation that the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting of November 28, 2016 be received. Moved by Councillor Randhawa, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, first up we have a report from our Director of Operations regarding property at Stratify 101 First Avenue East. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Brain. This report comes from the Office of the Approving Officer. The recommendation is that Council approve the application from Taggart Holding Limited to convert the building at 101 First Avenue East into 2 strata units. The intent is to convert the existing building into 2 strata units, 1 private residential unit and the remainder in a commercial unit. According to the Strata Property Act, stratification of existing buildings require approval from Municipal Council. In reference to rental and accommodations in the area, this will not affect either. In regard to the compliance to municipal bylaws, all departments have approved the proposed strata and all inspections have been completed and approved. Notifications were issued to the surrounding properties and nothing has been brought forward. Further to this, there are no cost implications to the city associated with this strata. Therefore, it is staff's recommendation and the approving officer's recommendation that the approval happens for the strata conversion. Thank you.
Questions from Council? Councillor Randhawa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So right now it's commercial or residential at present?
Right now, the zoning, actually I can get back to you with what the zoning is for the property. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it is one unit. So what they are doing is they're looking to stratify and create 2 units, one an airspace parcel on the top floor and then on the bottom floor just a commercial parcel.
Councillor Thorkelson.
I just wanted to know what an airspace parcel you said?
Yeah, the term airspace parcel means that the parcel starts off of the ground, so it's a second floor parcel. So the parcel doesn't actually have like land space on the bottom, so it starts on the second floor and is just an airspace parcel. So it encapsulates the house that's in there, the residential unit. Sorry. Go ahead.
So to the top unit is residential. Thank you. That's what I think. That's what I don't know if that's what you wanted to know, but that's what I certainly wanted to know. So,
Councillor Niche.
Am I right to assume that the idea behind this is just so that if they ever wanted to sell their unit as a house separate from the building, then they would be able to do that? That's kind of what I get out of it.
That is correct, yes.
No, I got no problem with it. I think it's a great idea. We've looked at having commercial and residential together in the town, and this is just one of those situations where it's a great idea.
The reason I was wondering, because we have stratified a number of units, and it's hard to read this document. I don't know who is deciding to waste the blue ink that I got, but anyway, it says that the council will consider application to stratify existing rental units only if the vacancy rate for this type of rental market housing involved in the application exceeds 4% for the preceding 12 months, as determined by CMA CMHC, semi-annual surveys. And so what I don't want to do is I don't want to start what I think that we should do is say, because the owner lives in the top apartment and wants to stratify the second floors in order to sell the business separately than the apartment, if that's what the idea is, that we don't change our policy or weaken our policy, because in this day and age, if we want to stratify, the reason this is put in is to protect, as it says, to protect rental properties, protect affordable. Actually, it says affordable rental units in this document, and if we're going to allow every apartment building to stratify, then that's not doing what this policy says. So all I was concerned about is for this type of rental housing, it probably isn't a whole lot, but I don't think that CMHC or the CMHC has above commercial area apartments.
Thank you, Councillor. I can answer that. If this strata was for more units or for a larger building, and that we would be doing a little bit of a different recommendation moving forward. But as this one does not affect any of the accommodation rental in the area, then we didn't proceed with having them do a full analysis of the rental in the area.
So I will make motion to go ahead with this.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Renhauer, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Further discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion more specific, because I don't believe that we have a low. I believe that our vacancy rate is a lot tighter than 4%, and so I would move that. I would have an amendment to this motion saying that due to the circumstances that the owner lives above and wants to stratify a business below, that we are permitting this despite the fact that there is more than there's a lower vacancy rate than 4%. What I'm concerned of is that somebody else comes and says that this is your policy. I mean, if staff wants to change, if we want to change policy, we can change policy, but that's what our policy is, and I don't see why we should be weakening it. And if so, then we should have a look at it. And I'm not opposed to this going ahead, because I think it's special circumstances, but I am opposed to weakening our policy and signaling to the community that we're going to weaken our policy.
So just clarify for me then, what exactly, say that, can you go again with your motion there, what your amendment, what you're trying to say? I need to hear it again as well, just so I can get a clarity around what you're putting forward.
I don't know the wording of the amendment, because I can't remember the wording of the motion, but it would be that we accept this, we allow this building to be stratified as an exception to the city's policy of not stratifying units unless the vacancy rate exceeds 4% for the preceding 12 months, and that we allow this exception because the owner lives upstairs and he's separating his unit from the building below.
Okay, so the amendment's seconded. Okay. Hold on, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
To me, it's, I mean, I don't think anyone's got an issue with it. We all understand the owner lives upstairs. I think it's just a matter of just trying to, if someone else came forward, you just want to protect what we already have written down, and I get that. It's you don't want somebody else coming forward with a 12-unit apartment saying, well, we're going to stratify all this. Oh, you just accepted this one last week. We want to do this now. And the policy says that unless it's been 4% or more vacancy for the last 12 months, that you can't do that. So that's our policy. But in this situation, the owner owns the building. lives upstairs. They built that unit just for themselves to live up there. So we just want to basically put on there that that's the reason why we're allowing this, is so that other people don't come forward thinking they're going to stratify every apartment building in town. So it's just a matter of just noting that that's why we did it. Not changing anything, not saying no, just letting other people know that's why we did it.
Councillor Cunningham?
Well, I'm just looking at this 4% or more in a year. Does that mean if we have a high vacancy rate or a lower vacancy rate, the rule changes?
Anyway, there's an amendment on the floor. Does anyone... Okay, so any further discussion on the amendment to change? So she's not bringing forward that we don't do this, just making a note that this is the reason why we're doing it. Go ahead.
So the idea, Councillor Cunningham, the idea is that the way the policy is written right now is to not allow people to stratify unless their vacancy rate is more than 4% for a year. So we don't have that ability right now because our vacancy rate is obviously less than 4. The idea being that you're keeping those units available for rent. But in this situation, we know the owner built it for themselves. They built it above the building. So all we're saying is that, we're accepting this one only because of the circumstances of that. But if we don't want to open up a can of worms where we allow this without stating this fact, so that when the next person comes and they've got a 12-unit apartment or something and say, well, we want to stratify all this, and we say, no, you can't do that. This is our policy. But you just changed it last week. So we're just trying to say the reason why we're allowing it. And the reason why we're allowing it is because this particular unit was built by the owners of the building. They live upstairs, and that's it. So it's just protecting the policy, but allowing this because of the circumstance.
No, I have no reason not to pass this, but I just don't understand this amendment with the 4%. So if somebody wants to stratify something, they just wait until the vacancy rate's high and then they come before us?
Yes.
It's sort of
it's a way,
let's wait till next year then and we'll get what we want. It's, I think we just look at it each case as it comes before us. Don't put a percentage on it because but that's just my thought. Anyway.
Okay. I think sounds like we're agreeing that we want to do this. So there's an amendment on the floor. It's first and seconded. Okay, any other discussion about the amendment? Okay, all those in favor for the amendment? Okay, motion's carried. Okay, back to the main motion. Any further discussion around the motion as amended? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to report from the Chief Financial Officer regarding the 2017 Financial Plan, Capital Works and Purchases.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Staff has prepared the recommended schedule of capital works and capital purchases for 2017. By Council approving these works, it provides staff the time required to tender projects and obtain design requirements for the projects planned to be performed throughout the year. Although the budgeted value of the capital projects is in the order of $27 million, 60% of this is funded through grants, followed by 23% funded through dividends. The remainder is funded through savings, short-term financing, and operations. Some notable projects planned to be undertaken in 2017 are continuation of the access road to Woodworth Dam, referred to as Phase 1 of the water project. Phase 2 of the water project is the replacement of Woodworth Dam itself, and Phase 3 is the submarine line replacement. We received a grant award on Phase 1 and have applied for Phase 2 and Phase 3 grant funding. 2017 will see the beginning of the West Berm expansion at the landfill. This is the final piece to complete the expansion of the existing landfill cell, which will provide the time necessary to begin the opening of a new 35-year landfill cell. The recreation complex is planning to install accessibility lifts in both the pool and civic center, as well as repair some of the plumbing in the hot tub and replace the lighting in the arena to LEDs. Council approved the replacement of the firefighting pumper truck in 2016. Delivery of this emergency vehicle is expected in July. During the 2nd Avenue Bridge decking rehab in 2016, it was determined that some timbers should be replaced in 2017. Given that the provincial government announced the paving of 2nd Avenue from McBride to the ferry terminal, the city wishes to combine the provincial program with the downtown repaving of 3rd Avenue. Council is asked to approve the capital works and purchases schedule so that staff can begin to plan and organize for their acquisition and construction in the 2017 fiscal period.
Comments? Okay, so I'll move the recommendation. Seconded by Councillor Anish. Okay, comments?
I just have a question, Ms. Bombin. What did we have for a capital purchase and capital works budget last year? If you can remember, I was too busy reading all of the rest of the package to look.
I believe it was $11 million, but that included phase 1 of the water project, so we are rolling over the phase 1 because it didn't get begun earlier in the year. So that makes up a large portion of 2017's. And of course, the dam and the and phase 3 of the water project, they make up the majority of this overall capital budget.
So you just carried over that grant to this year, and that's why it looks okay.
Further comments? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Moving on to 9A, report from Chief Financial Officer regarding the Utilities Bylaw and Assets Management Reserve Fund Bylaw.
Council is being asked to consider 7 bylaws this evening. The water, sewer, solid waste, and cemetery rate bylaws will expire at the end of 2016. Each utility is self-funding, and to maintain their self-sufficiency, the operation increases proposed are 3% per year, except in certain circumstances. The previous rate bylaws, which covered 2014 through 2016, had increases of 5% per year. In 2014, staff conducted a full review of the solid waste bylaw and had it rewritten to improve comprehension, eliminate redundant language, and streamline its effectiveness. In 2016, staff conducted the same for the water and sewer bylaws. The new bylaws include clarification to language, removes references to outdated bylaws, and adds further protection to the city in certain circumstances. Additionally, conversion to water meters for commercial payers is encouraged, and fairness is incorporated into the bylaws to eliminate the subsidization of certain services by the community ratepayers as a whole. One final addition to the water, sewer, and solid waste bylaws are the introduction of an asset management levy of 2%. This charge is to be allocated to a respective reserve fund to be created for each utility. These separate utility reserve funds are the final 3 bylaws to be considered today and are proposed as a type of savings account that will receive the asset management levy. The accumulated reserve amounts can be drawn on by council for planned replacement and emergency funds as the case may be for the specific utility. Systematic allocations of this nature safeguard ratepayers from unusual spikes in rates, which adds predictability of fees and demonstrates proactive management of core infrastructure. Council has embarked on rebuilding Rupert, and senior governments are now requiring an asset management strategy. These utility reserve fund bylaws demonstrate to the community and granting agencies Council's commitment to managing its core infrastructure. As mentioned before, the operations increases in the previous bylaw in fees and charges were 5% per year. This is with no capital replacement allocation. Although the sum is still 5% per year, we are proposing that 3% go towards regular operations and 2% be set aside for capital renewal of core infrastructure.
Ms. Bombin, have we ever done asset replacement management for these bylaws, or is this the first time this is being done?
This is the first time this is being done. In the 2016 budget, the regular financial plan budget, we had asked the community whether a 2% increase for infrastructure asset management was considered reasonable, and we received a response that said yes, it was reasonable.
Also, is it my understanding is now when it comes to grant applications, like when we apply for the waterworks, that part of the plan now is that we must show asset management plans, otherwise we won't be eligible for grants. Is that how it's beginning, the process is starting with that now?
It's not just plans, it's also that they want to see that you're actually putting money away. And yes, we were asked in this most recent CCWF, I believe it's called, application to demonstrate where we were on the asset management strategy continuum. Although they didn't ask for amounts that we had set aside, they did ask whether or not something was already in place in order to replace basically any of the assets that we construct with today's grant dollars should we receive them.
Right. Other comments from council? Councillor Renhala?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like about 3%, how much average house will cost?
So basically, of the water, sewer, and solid waste utilities, I'm just going to include all of the fees, the asset management, just to be very transparent and clear. So this year in 2016, the utilities fees was $1,263 for the year for all three. And in 2017, it will go up to $1,327. So that's a difference of about $64 for the entire year. This works out, if you were to look at it per day, in 2016, a household paid $3.46 per day for all three types of services, water, sewer, and solid waste. And then in 2017, it would go up to $3.64 per day.
So like to show them, right, like we are doing management. So how like that 3% number comes, like it could be 1%, it could be 0.5% or something like that?
And the reason that is 3% is because we do have contractual obligations for collective agreements. There's also it was 5% before, but we went to 3% to try and cut it as best we could. But the reality is that with fuel increases, although the fuel's been down recently, it still means that transportation costs are still high. They haven't scaled those back so much. Supplies costs are still about the same. We haven't really seen any reduction in those. So when you add all of that together, 3% is a fairly reasonable amount for any increases that you have for wages and for any types of supplies, delivery, fuel, all that. It's all rolled up into one package, essentially, when you look at the total, the utility fund actually being self-sufficient. So this increase covers those costs. We try never to have too much of a surplus at all. If there is any surplus, we generally recently have been drawing down on it in order to make any of those emergency replacements. We have had some emergency replacements this year, Alfred Strait being one of them. So these increases are set to try and be as lean as possible.
Other comments?
I think that we used to have a utility. I didn't call asset management fund. It was called something else, but it was a utility reserve, and we spent our utility reserve in 2001, 2, 3, or something like that. And so I'm not opposed certainly to an asset management plan, but I am opposed to. I think an asset management plan should be a percentage of your operating budget and should not be a percentage increase in tax. So not of your operating budget, of your utility budget, right? So if the utility budget is X, then I think that we should, and we're going to have an increase in there, that a percentage of that increase should be going into a reserve fund for future, into a council reserve fund for future future repairs, and I think that way, if you do it as a percentage of what your utilities costs are, and then you can translate that into a percentage of your asset management. But just a 2% increase every year forever on asset management doesn't, to me, mean anything. It just means we're going to be put money in, and on what basis, right? So if you're putting money into a fund to replace your assets, you should be basing it on something rather than just how much it's going to cost. And then you can have a look at what your end result is, but you can say it's going to cost 10% a year. Well, we can't afford that, so we're going to ratchet it back to 2. But just to say that we're just going to have a tax increase of 2% or an increase of 2% that's going to go into a fund without any rationale. And so that's all my concern has been, whether we want to have some rationale that could be creating a surplus fund, because this fund will be a surplus fund. And then I think we need to have stricter rules on, because as a fund of the council, it's not a reserve fund that's a statutory reserve fund. At least they haven't made them statutory yet. So we can set our own rules, and future council could change those rules, but we could set their own rules up for what these funds would have to be. And I would like to see what these funds would be used for, because you can bankrupt a fund fairly quickly if you don't have good rules. So if we're going to actually have a replacement fund, is what I call it, if we're going to have a replacement fund, then we need to have some rules about how we're going to manage it, so it doesn't become just a tax increase fund, right? It just doesn't become, okay, we're going to put 3% in, but really going to have a little slush fund over here that has the extra 2% in, and then we're going to need it all. We're going to use it on it becomes something that we use on a regular basis. And so I like to see the rules for asset management funds before we start setting them up, and then I'd like to see some kind of a, and I know we have this big infrastructure deficit, but I think that we need to have it as part of the operating budget, what we need every year. And I think it needs to be defensible, not that we just put $2 or 2% every year into a separate fund and then not have any rules about how it's going to be spent. And I know there's rules suggested in this report, only council hasn't adopted them, and we haven't created a reserve fund, a replacement fund, reserve fund, whatever you want to call it.
Ms. Bauman, do you want to comment on that?
I can say that typically municipalities are trying to catch up, and the idea is that you should be putting away funds that match your depreciation in a year. So for utilities, you can imagine that if you're starting right now, some of them hypothetically have been fully depreciated because they are pretty much at the end of their life, for example, like the dam. And new pipes, for instance, you can say, well, we put it in this year and the useful life of it is, say, 40 years. So you can actually quantify approximately how much the depreciation is. But that is a significant amount when you look at a water dam, and this is just the water fund, for instance, water dam and all of the pipes, the mains, all that sort of thing. To be honest, no users could afford to put away the amount of depreciation that they typically say is recommended. So 2% is considered at least a starting point. It doesn't mean that it was going to go up. Council would have to approve something like that. But to be able to put away what they recommend, and you have to be reasonable about these things. There's reality, and then there's utopia, right? So the creation of these funds is so that the amount that is levied from a rate, it's not a tax, it's a rate. So there's supposed to be some kind of confidence that the reserves are created so that nobody can just go ahead and utilize those funds to do a kind of an emergency repair, for instance, or just go ahead and use that as a slush fund, basically, to go and do a capital item in the following year, that sort of thing. Council would have to be the one to basically say, yes, we will use that fund for this particular capital project. If council wants to hold on to it until there's a minimum of, say, $2 million that has been accumulated in there before they'll even touch it, that's fine. But that you're right, there could be some extra rules attached to those funds, but the idea behind the reserve fund was to actually provide some confidence that no one would be able to just go ahead. For example, anyone sitting in this position could just go ahead and say, we need to go and replace the water line right in front of City Hall. Let's just go ahead and use that reserve fund. This is supposed to be specific. It's supposed to be a savings account for all of the users in this community who have been utilizing all these services and have not put any money towards the revitalization of those services. It's also to hopefully help reduce any possibility, if ever we need to, of any debt load that we would have to incur in order to make any emergency replacements if we don't have anything, if there was no grants that come to us. It's supposed to be an incremental savings, and it is designed specifically to be a separate fund that council is the only one that could have authorization to be able to allocate money from.
Ms. Bauman, so that means, first, let's just say today we did do this recommendation. The rules, we could, since it's not like there's going to be a whole pile of cash starting to flow into these things, we could spend the next couple months fleshing out the rules in terms of if we wanted to go down that direction. That's one thing. Is that, like, the urgency around the rules around reserve funds isn't today, but I do know that the actual bylaw rates are more immediate. That's correct, right? Okay, so let's just say that that's an option. Then also, if we did taxation to our actual regular financial plan, and we said okay, we're going to put 2% away a year for asset management, so we can do it through taxation and through the utilities at a double level, correct? Like if I'm just saying the option is there to do it if we wanted to do it on a more operating level, and then this is at a utility level.
That's the purpose of these ones being the utility reserve funds.
Right.
Is they're just specifically for the utilities, because remember, each of these funds has to be self-liquidating. The operations, we can't tax in the operations fund and flow that money into a utility without the utility eventually paying the money back to the operations.
Right.
So the rates are levied in the utilities fund separately. They pay for the water, the sewer, and the solid waste. The taxation comes into play when it comes to the buildings, the recreation center, the ferry, the roads. It's those types of services that the city is offering. That's where the taxation and grants and leases and all that sort of thing comes in. You can get grants for other utilities, for instance. We've applied on those for the water. But those ones are specific to those utilities. So if we do get the grant for the water project, we cannot use any of that piece towards any of the roads or the recreation center, right? It's specific. So yes, we could have a reserve in the operations fund for asset management, but it would have to be specific for operations type items that the council has determined that they want to provide as a service. So, for example, if the Lester Center was to completely get redone, that is a city-owned building. The asset management fund, reserve fund for operations could get utilized towards that. Bridges, for instance, is another large one, yes. But that is in the operations fund. So if council decided to go and do a 2% asset management or a 1% or a 5% asset management, they could create a reserve in the operations fund as well for that specific purpose. And these ones are specifically for just each of the utilities. Right. And that's the core service infrastructure that municipalities have.
So what's the consequence if we don't do this today? If we don't set up these reserve funds, like what's the consequence?
There is no consequence, because we would, if, let me just backtrack. The utilities themselves the bylaws, should they be passed before December 31st, 2016, there is in those fee schedules 2% asset management is levied on metered rates, on meter rentals. Also, and then of course in March we have our residential fees. It's the same with solid waste. If people drive along out to the landfill, there is 2% increase. We can keep track of that and still hold on to it. We wouldn't spend it, and then we could still work on these reserve fund bylaws. And then we would just transfer it in.
Mr. Long?
Yeah, I think the consequences are that at some point we don't have any money to do what we need to do for these services. I mean, that's the serious consequence.
Please press any key on your touchtone keypad.
Okay. The reality is, within a year or two, we won't be getting any grants unless we have a legitimate asset management program. That's pretty clear. The senior governments are all signaling that to us. They gave us, $80,000 last year to do a plan. You can't just have a plan on the shelf. You actually have to start putting money away in the plan for it to be legitimate. So I think there are two major risks are we run out of money and we have some serious problems. One of the bridges fails, our sewer or water system fails. We've been pretty lucky. It's 101 years old now, and it hasn't failed yet. It's way beyond its useful life, as are all of our bridges, which are probably 30 to 40 years past their useful life. So we're running on borrowed infrastructure time. So if we don't start putting some money away to cover those things off, we run the risk of having no money when something fails. We run the risk of not ever being able to get another grant because we haven't got a proper asset management program. So I think these are risky things for council to kind of ignore because I think, as professionals, we have an obligation to tell you that this is the most rational and appropriate behavior on the part of the city as a corporation is to actually start to put some money away. As Ms. Bauman says, there's not a lot of money. We're not. If we told you what the asset management number was, it'd be 2% of our deficit. That would be 280. What's 2% of $280 million? Is a lot more money than we can afford. So let's not go there, but let's find a way to put together some money into an account which has a specific purpose that allows us then to continue to apply for grants and allows us to continue to deal with the failures. And we have had constant failures in our water system and our sewer system in the last year. I mean, look at the whole water line that failed. I thought Richard did a brilliant job looking after it, fixing it up. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy because we make these things seem seamless and seem easy, and everyone can kind of go to sleep and turn the water on. They have water, and so that it isn't important. It's a lot different if a bridge falls down, I tell you. Then everybody gets asset management. But with underground servicing, it's very difficult to convince people that these are important assets. And we see that they are failing on a regular basis now. They're all past any reasonable usable life span. We're a community that's almost 100 years old. Much of the assets are 80 and 60 years old. These things are way past their useful life. So this is a tipping our hat to the senior governments to say we'll do something that's legitimate so that we can continue to be in the running for grants. Because otherwise, I don't think if we don't do something, we're not going to be in the running for any more grants. Maybe we'll squeak by for another couple of years, but after that, we won't be on the top of the list.
No, I'm okay with. I believe council should go with this recommendation. That's my personal view. I do, however, agree with Councillor Thurkelson's views around what some of the rules around the reserve funds. How do we want to see that going? I don't think that's needed to be decided tonight, but I do know that now is probably the time for us to move forward on this type of thing. Again, it's not going to be all the money in the world, but no, I definitely see that. So there's a couple comments here. Councillor Nish and then Councillor Renhawa.
As much as I hate seeing this, I am kind of more agreeing that we have to move in that direction. I really wish that councils from 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when this town was in its heyday, I wish they had a thought about our future and put money away for us so that we wouldn't be in this position. To me, it bothers me so much that I would have to, raise the rates again every year, but after being in the seat for 2 years and seeing all the crap that the provincial government has downloaded on the municipalities and the federal government, how little money they give us, and now we have to put an asset management plan in place so that we can beg for some more money from them. Unfortunately, it's the way we have to go, I think. As much as I hate doing it, it's us protecting my kid's future in this town, or anybody else's family in the next 30 years when their pipe breaks in front of their house and it has to get replaced and the bank account's empty. So as much as I hate to agree with this one, I have to agree just because just looking at the numbers and they're ridiculous.
Councillor Renhawa, then Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I understand where it comes from, but on the other hand, our taxpayer already paying higher taxes here, and any increase on anything will reflect on housing market, commercial market, which is already struggling here, trying to survive. Lots of store closing because they can't make their rents and they can't compete with our neighboring communities. So any increase will reflect that, and I think 3%, like $64 or more, it will affect there again, and housing market, especially rental market too. So I think I can't support this motion. I think maybe to show them we can have another number like 0.5% or 1%, something like that. But 3%, I think already we increase 5% on recreation fees or 15% on the icing. So I think it will too much for our community.
Councillor Cunningham.
First, before I get into that, language 2.51 on page 23, page 5 of 18, it's compulsory service connections. Richard might be able to answer this for me. It says, where street service improvements are scheduled for installation by the city during a current budget year, the engineer shall order compulsory service connections to be installed to any property abutting said street and served by the water system, regardless of whether or not any improvement is constructed on the property, and the cost of the service connection shall be the responsibility of the owner, such sum being payable on demand. And then does that mean that if we do any street improvements, say down a residential area, yes please Richard, that any owner on that street has to pay for a reconnection if we're redoing water services or anything like that?
Well, Councillor Cunningham, we have discretion to enforce that if we have to. If we deem it necessary that they need to do a compulsory connection because they are undersized or not appropriately sized, we can do a compulsory connection. In my time here, I haven't enforced that. I don't know how much we do enforce that, but it is there. It's in the bylaw so that if we need to enforce it, we can.
Well, we're talking about rebuilding our infrastructure in this town. We're talking about putting the fees up right now, and then this little piece here would add another $2,590 to each property owner on that street that has their improvements. And now if we're going to go ahead with all this infrastructure rebuilding in the future, I don't particularly like this clause, because you go down a street and you're just adding that much more to the homeowner who's already, as Councillor Renhawa says, is being taxed to the hilt and we're putting up their utilities. I understand we have to put up utilities, and I understand the asset management fee. But I really don't understand where, if you go down a street and we've got aging infrastructure, now you're putting that extra burden on the homeowner to fix that aging infrastructure going into his house.
So that clause is been carried over from the old bylaw. It was in the bylaw and in all the previous bylaws before that. So that clause has been carried over into the new bylaw. And as I said, I've never enforced that clause before. We've done road rehabilitations like on 9th Avenue East. We've done them in areas where we've gone in and put in new lines. We didn't enforce that clause. Again, it's for sort of anomalies and people that don't have the appropriate sizing. And if we had to do it, then we could enforce that clause in there.
Mr. Long?
Yeah, this is an old bylaw. This is an old section that goes in most utility bylaws that just requires people to hook up, even if they don't want to hook up. It's not really applicable here in this community as much as it is in other communities where you're putting a new service in, and somebody maybe is on a well and doesn't want to hook up. And so you have to make it so that everybody mandatorily have to hook up. Same with the sewer line. You know, you might have a septic tank and you don't want to hook up. So this is a hangover for that. I think in our context, there may be circumstances where and there'll be very unusual circumstances where the size of the servicing that goes to this property is undersized, for example. Might be a ½ inch and maybe 3/4 or whatever. And that's the only circumstance that I could see this authority would ever be used in this particular community. But all utility bylaws have a clause of this kind that makes it mandatory to hook up to community services, because everybody has to share in those things. So it's way more applicable when you might have people on one side of the road and people on the other side of the road that are there and haven't hooked up for some reason. And maybe they're on I don't think we have anybody who's on groundwater here, but there are lots of communities that do that. So if you're going to run the services down there, you've actually got to make sure everybody hooks up. So in this circumstance, I can't see very many circumstances where we would actually make it mandatory that somebody hooked up, because everybody's already hooked up. Unless their services are undersized or there's some anomaly, I can't see us ever using this.
It says right in here, served by the water system regardless of whether or not any improvements is constructed on the property. So they're already hooked up. And this would apply to somebody that's hooked up already. And the fact that it's in here, I don't particularly like it, because up until now, we haven't done a lot of infrastructure upgrades, and we're sitting here talking about reserve funds for doing upgrades and everything else, and how we have this infrastructure deficit, and that we're going to have to start working on a lot of these systems. The fact that this bylaw is in there and it's going to cost somebody $2,590 when you go down their street, I don't particularly like it. It's just something that I think we should revisit. If it's there for people on groundwater or wells and that, then fine. We have no one in town on that, so let's get rid of it or alter it to such a way, because, it's black and white. We live in a black and white world sometimes, and it's there. So I just happened to be, when I was reading through this encyclopedia for this meeting, I came across that and didn't particularly like it. But that aside, that'll be something we'll have to revisit if it's an old bylaw that should be changed, because it's there and it could cost a lot of people a lot of money if so deemed. It's up to the discretion of the engineer, not city council or anyone else. And I know Richard's very fair and everything, but still, it's there. But on the other side of things, I, like Councillor Neese, really struggled with this, because this is going, within 2 years, by 2019, we are going to be putting our utilities up $200. And for people on fixed incomes and that's a big jump. And I'm a little concerned about it. I also see the other side of it.
Hold on, Councillor.
Where we have
is that correct, the $200?
No, in 2019 it'll be $1,407, including the asset management. In 2016 it was $1,263, so it's not $200.
Okay, so I can see it's only $170, but but that's still a big jump for somebody on a fixed income.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's still a big jump on somebody on a fixed income. I also see the other side of the coin where we have to maintain our infrastructure and the asset management part of it. But I just struggle with this. I know it's I just don't know. It's one of these reasons why we sit in these seats and make these tough decisions. If we don't make them, the city doesn't go forward and starts falling apart. At the same time, people's lives could be falling apart because of it, because we're putting such a strain on people with fixed incomes and that.
Well, I move the recommendation with an additional to it that we would we'll map out how we're going to spend the reserve fund moving forward in the next couple of months. Second by Councillor Niche. Further discussion?
This is the first reading, isn't it? Or do we have to?
3 readings.
3 readings. Okay, so I was wondering if we can also get a 5-year plan showing us what it's going to look like in 5 years, what the rates are going to be. So all together, like it's hard when I start adding them all up, and it would be nice to get them all in a report where they're all added up, where we see what the increases will be for the next 5 years, all added up, all tallied. So at the end we have it, and shown it broken down into how much will be in our reserve fund, how much will be in our I keep calling them operating fund, but our normal regular utilities funds, and then maybe an estimate of what it is going to cost to build that another cell when we're going to have to start building that larger cell, and for our landfill site, and I suppose sewer and water you could do as much as you had the people, as many employees you have, right, or as many contractors as you can find. I'm sure would love to lay our pipe for us. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think we're not looking at a 1 year like we are with our normal taxes, right? We're looking at putting fees and services in for a 5-year period. And so it would be nice to look at what each year is going to look like, and what we are going to gain into our plan, into our asset. And the thing is, see, I remember even when we had bad years, that we had surpluses in almost every year, we had surpluses in our utilities funds. And so because we were unable to do the work or whatever, we had surpluses in our utilities funds. So, we should be having a schedule on how to use those surpluses. And so if we're going to be having a surplus in our utilities funds and then another surplus in our asset management fund, that just looks like too many surpluses to me, with such a large increase. So anyway, I would like to see that for in a report for the next reading.
Ms. Baum, is it possible to have that done by the next meeting, that sheet?
Well, yes, that's for sure. I'll just speak to the surpluses that you refer to, Councillor Thorkson. And sometimes in those cases, what was planned on being done that one particular year didn't end up getting done, so it ended up being rolled over. So what we've found, even in the operations, for instance, we've been planning on doing the ferry dock for a number of years. So every year that gets rolled over, we're finally doing it, right? So that's part of the reason, as I understand it, from years previous.
Okay, further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion's carried. Okay, reports, questions, and inquiries from council.
Actually, I'll bring it up again. A lot of discussion around the condition of the sidewalks in town and that. And there's large lots in town that are owned by people from out of town. They bought this land on speculation and they haven't done anything about it. and it's just sitting there. And I've noticed there's large areas like the Dairy Queen, the lot across from the credit union and that, where the sidewalks weren't cleared. I would like city staff to send these people a letter or even give them a phone call, and either they contract somebody to do it or we contract somebody to do it and give them the bill if that's possible. But it's just something that, you come down McBride and right there is a large tract of just sheet of ice, and for a lot of people it's very difficult. And other areas of town, well, homeowners or somebody can pick up a shovel and do it too. But I really think these absentee owners should be taken to task.
Okay. Other reports or questions from council? Okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Cunningham. All those in favor? Meeting's adjourned.